Here we are.
Okay.
Hey, kudos to Sherilyn and Summer for coming up with the Teague Talk
You like it?
banner.
We're like legit now.
Yeah, they're legit. They like designed this themselves. We got lighting. We got, oh my God.
Look at our lighting ring. You gotta show this.
Right.
We're like.
I hope this is okay for the volume. We're good. Someone says hard to hear.
Really?
Someone,
Come on, move a little
most people
closer.
Why are you
say
guys so far
something.
away?
I don't know.
Don't use your feet like the whole come closer.
Yeah, come on in.
I don't
I was
understand.
trying
You
not
know,
to
they're
cut
so
off
forward,
the
everything.
banner.
Yeah.
This is, by the way, this
Yeah.
is a family event.
Yeah.
Now your chairs have to be closer because in my vertical format, I'm like, there's you.
I'm
Let's
afraid
see.
of her.
Do we want to do Did you want to do
How's
Sherilyn,
that?
you might have to move the left just a smidget.
Yeah,
There you go.
I know,
Perfect.
right?
Okay, how's that? Right there.
Okay.
Are we good?
Yeah, we're great. Okay.
We're still rookies at this, but we're working on it.
I know.
I'm trying to get positioned here. I'm feeling very
This is like our
I'm used to
10th.
us walking around and stuff.
I think this is our 10th show this
It's our
year.
10th show, and this is the first one where we're going to actually sit and take questions from people about just anything. And if your question is legit, then we're going to try to give you an answer that makes sense for everybody. And of course, we're looking for questions that might appeal to a broad spectrum of performance boaters. And we have some that have been submitted to us, but we welcome you guys to send in any question you want, and Sherilyn will let us know what's going on here. And here we are.
Yep. So welcome to Teague Talk with the Swoops. We
10th show.
10th show.
Yeah.
Live at Teague Custom Marine, Mrs. Swoop and Bob Teague.
I guess we're going to keep doing this for a while.
We're gonna keep.
We made a banner. So.
Yeah,
we made a banner,
we
yeah.
made a banner, so we have to make it worth our while.
So we're going to head and start with some of the questions that some of you submitted through our pages on Teague Custom Marine as well as Swoop Motorsports. And then once we kind of make it our way through that, we will take some live questions as well. So here's the time to ask Bob. Are you ready for this? So
Yeah. Be nice to me now.
everyone's been waiting for an open discussion with you. So we're going to go ahead and take some of the questions now. One of them is, what is a timing curve? And what is your timing curve on your engines? So.
Okay, it's actually a very broad question, but it has a lot of answers. So a timing curve is actually the range of timing, and that is the spark, that a spark occurs before top dead center while an engine is running through different RPM ranges and loads. So most engines run with the timing, and that's when the spark occurs before the piston reaches top dead center. And so typically a performance engine idles at around 14 to 15, maybe 16 degrees timing. That means that the spark actually occurs about 15 degrees as the crankshaft turns before the piston reaches top dead center. Okay, so the things that influence the timing curve, of course, are the engine design and whether or not it's a mechanical advanced system or it's computer controlled. So let's go with mechanical advanced system to start with. The carbureted, naturally aspirated, a carbureted supercharged motor, whatever, generally use the mechanical advance, and the best way to do it on a performance engine is to have a little more advance at idle. And also a short curve. And a short curve means that, that there's not a lot of timing difference between idle and wide open throttle. So if you're using an MSD distributor, for example, if you use the black bushing limits the timing to 20 degrees of crankshaft timing, which is actually 10 degrees of camshaft timing, because the camshaft is turning half the speed as a crankshaft. So what happens is the reason that you don't want to have the distributor locked out so that you're running, let's say, 36 degrees all the time, is that there's too much timing for starting the motor. It'll cause the engine to actually buck and maybe try to run backwards. So you have a little bit lower timing to allow the engine to start. It's easier on the starter motor and everything else. And then when it's idling around that 14 to 16 degrees before top dead center timing. As you increase the RPM, and generally speaking on a high performance motor, by the time you get to about 2,500 to 3,000 RPM, in a mechanical advanced situation, it reaches what we call full timing. So usually when you set the timing, with the timing light on a high performance motor, you set it at full advance as opposed to setting it at idle, like you would do on a car or something like that. So you rev the engine up to 3,000 RPM with the timing light, and you set, let's say, the timing at 36 degrees or to 38 degrees on a naturally aspirated motor, maybe a little bit less on a supercharged motor, maybe 34. That's the timing that you set it at, and wherever it ends up at idle, that's where it ends up. And so that's a mechanical advanced timing curve. Now, when you get into computer-controlled engines, the timing is actually controlled by the computer itself. But the first thing that has to happen is there has to be on an engine that has a crank trigger or a distributor, the first thing you have to do is have a base timing. And the base timing is set by taking the computer and put it in the base timing mode. In other words, it locks out the timing so that it stays stable, and basically the engine normally runs up to about 1,500 RPM, and you set the timing at a base time, and in most cases it's about 8 degrees before top dead center. Then the computer switched back into the normal timing mode, and it is the timing in a fuel injected motor that actually controls the idle speed, because it's 0% throttle. There's two things that control the idle speed: timing and the air and the IAC, which is air idle control motor. Which those two things work in conjunction. So if you have a designated idle speed in the computer of, let's say, 900 RPM, it's timing that keeps the motor idling at 0% throttle at 900 RPM, and then that curve, the timing curve, is then controlled by the computer, and it's based off of a lot of things. But of course, one of them's RPM, one of them is load, and based off of what the map sensor is telling it or something else. But then it's also modified in case the engine goes into a knock situation. Then the knock sensors will pull timing out to keep the engine from hurting itself. So timing is one of those things that you need to have at the right parameters, and also if it's not correct, you can end up detonating the motor, damaging pistons, all sorts of other things. But so a timing curve is based off of those parameters. You got the mechanical advanced systems on the natural aspirated, supercharged, non-digital engines, and then you're using a computer control the timing on the fuel injected engines that are using a ECM, and it's pretty much the same across the map, except for the group of engines that use a crank trigger, a cam sensor, and basically it's all established. They don't run a distributor, and it's all established in the computer itself based off the program, and that's what sets the timing curve.
Okay. And I think you was wondering what your timing curve was, but that might be top secret, so.
Well, actually,
and it's probably, again, different for whatever you
well,
are.
exactly, and
Your application
the real situation is that running the most advanced you can run. In other words, the spark occurring sooner before top dead center than top dead center, without creating a detonation situation, in general terms, would result in the most power. Anytime you get into a detonation situation, not only you experience the possibility of engine damage, but it also diminishes the horsepower. So there's that fine balance right there of controlling the time. Of course, there's other things that are factors, including fuel delivery and everything else. You have to have the right air-fuel ratio and everything else in combination with the timing. and also you have to have certain engine temperatures that coordinate with that and everything else. But that's in a nutshell what a timing curve is.
So basically, email more like basic details about what you have, because I mean that's pretty broad. So you have more questions.
So, in general terms, the you know, in a pump gas supercharged engine, let's say a carbureted 510 cubic engine with an 871 on it, generally speaking, the maximum full advance would be in the range of 34 degrees.
There you go.
And with a 20-degree timing curve, which means that you'll be idling at idle around 14 degrees. Okay, so you take the 20 degrees away. Fuel-injected engines can modify the timing based off of load, and sometimes in a light load situation with supercharged, you might get to 36, 38. And in heavy load, they start to back the timing up to prevent detonation. On our Supercat motors, they're 9.5 to 1, run on 93 octane. The full advance is at 40 degrees because that's where the engines like to be. That is something that you discover by lots of testing, dyno time, and everything else to find out whether they're going to survive. And also, you're looking for that last 1 horsepower.
Again, called Teague Marine. That's a lot. Okay, so on to another question that we have. Do you have any old school upgrade packages for the HP 500 car motors?
Yeah, the HP 500s, actually, I raced Factory 2 for quite a while for Formula and a couple of other companies, and at that time we were running the HP 500s. And an HP 500, and not to be confused with the HP 500 EFI, we're talking about the carbureted version right now.
Yeah.
Use a single 800 Holly on a dart intake with basically a GM 502 iron head engine. Those engines were equipped with the Mercury version of Gill exhaust, and the original ones had a low riser. The later ones had a little higher riser, and the reason that the riser was changed to help to minimize the water reversion coming back up the exhaust at a low idle speed, and so they made their risers higher. So that being said, if you have carbureted HP 500s, the first thing you want to consider doing is changing the exhaust. One of the best performance upgrades you can do to those motors is to put CMI E-tops on them. If your budget is a little less limited, sport tubes. So that would be, and that's something that you can carry on in that boat, no matter what you do to the engines, because the exhaust system will work out. The other problem with those engines, and not only those engines, but a lot of the engines that were built in that era, is the GM iron heads. GM iron heads at that time used a stellite exhaust seat, and now with the increased ethanol that we have in the fuel, and also the increased combustion temperature, we are seeing a significant amount of exhaust seat failures in the iron heads. So the iron heads, while they might make horsepower, they're not a great design head. While they might make horsepower because of the heat retention, the reliability factor is not as good. So one of the other things you can do with those engines is increase the power and the reliability by adding a decent performance aluminum head that has good exhaust seats, especially stainless Inconel or super alloy like a Faria valve on the exhaust side. It's always important to have wide exhaust seats to help cool the valves, because the time that the valve is actually in contact with the seat, significant enough valve spring tension to keep the valve on the seat while it's closed. If it dances, it doesn't stay cool. So those are some of the factors that you want to consider. Now, if you really want to go crazy with a pair of HP 500 carbureted motors. It's a 502, basically a standard GM block. That engine is no different than a 502 Magnum, other than the fact that they changed the cam, did a little bit of bowl work in the heads, and changed the valves, springs, and put that different carburetor on it. And that was the program. But you could take that platform and increase the compression to 9.5, bore it up to 4.5 inch bore, which puts you into a standard ring pack instead of the metric GM ring pack. Build it at about 9.3 to 9.5 compression. Put on a decent head. And I'm just going to tell you, one of the best intake manifolds that we have actually used is an Edelbrock, and it's one of the cheaper ones, but it actually works. And put one of those on there with one of the later model 1050 Dominators, upgrade it with an MSD ignition system, and have a valve train and a cam profile that'll support a 6,000 RPM engine, and you're going to have a 620 horsepower engine that doesn't revert water with good exhaust. And so it's a whole nother program, and it's probably the best thing to do if you have a carbureted version of a 500 because it's not a digital motor. In order to change it to an EFI, it's a whole nother expense, and it'd be fine for one of your boats, a 2000 1998 boat or something like that, and you'll be totally happy with it.
So exhaust is key, basically. First thing you could do with it.
What's that, exhaust?
Exhaust, yeah.
Exhaust, because
yeah, first thing.
and those engines were supplied with a valve spring and retainer that didn't do well with water reversion, because when you have water reversion, it ends up contaminating the oil. That moisture gets in the oil and it causes valve spring failure, and that leads to other catastrophic problems. So the first thing you need to do before you do any modifications to those motors is change the exhaust.
Bob, real quick, can you just explain water reversion in the short?
Okay, that's
Very
that's-
short.
yeah. People go, what is water reversion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
As you know, we're in an environment where our engines are running in water, and our exhaust is cooled by water, and so in the situation with this particular motor that we're talking about, with the gill manifolds, or the Mercury's or copy of the gill manifolds, and a standard riser, the tailpipes, which is a riser, is actually water jacketed. In other words, they have a pipe inside of a pipe. But because of the cam profile and the pulses in the exhaust, what happens is that the water that's entering the exhaust closer to the tip at low idle speeds starts getting sucked back up into the engine. And if you have one of these engines, you'll notice that if you're idling for a while, it starts to miss. And basically what's happening is the plugs are being fouled because they're getting wet by water. And obviously it's a lot more crucial if it's salt water, because salt water is much more damaging. And so water reversion is simply a situation where the exhaust water that's supposed to be getting expelled out the tailpipes is being sucked back up into the engine at idle speeds. It doesn't happen when you're underway. It happens in idle, and at one point, a service bolt that came out by Mercury on these particular motors that required that the idle speed for these motors while at gear was increased, and the purpose was to help minimize the water reversion. So reversion is basically water being reverted back up into the motor.
Yeah, someone's leading on
Yeah,
to that. Okay.
so Joey's asking, are there any performance gains by going to dry exhaust, or is it primarily to prevent reversion?
Well, let's say in this particular example, if you had gills or something like that, a manifold style exhaust with a riser on it, and it's a combination of the exhaust system and the cam profile. And one thing that performance marine engine has to have, especially if the cam profile is slightly aggressive, is that the cam timing needs to be modified somewhat And typically speaking, we use what's known as 114 degree center line. And basically that has to do with where the cam timing is, where the lobes are compared to top dead center. And 114 degree center line is actually a combination or relationship of the intake and the exhaust lobes to each other. What causes water reversion is that period of time when the intake and the exhaust are open at the same time, also known as the overlap stroke. And at that particular time, while the piston is going down and the exhaust valve is still open, it's causing water to come back. So if there's no water in the exhaust, in other words, the exhaust is completely dry, you're not going to be sucking any water back up in the engine. That doesn't mean your performance is going to be awesome, that just means you're not going to have a water reversion problem.
So it's kind of,
So-
one doesn't necessarily go with the other.
So the point is that you're going to have better performance with a header system over a manifold and tailpipe system, but you can minimize the water reversion by having dry exhaust. Now, with dry exhaust, you're not going to be able to use mufflers in most cases. If you do use mufflers, they're going to deteriorate quickly, and so there's a lot of other drawbacks. So, it's kind of a catch-22. What are you going to do?
But basically, you can change your idle a little bit to
Oh.
help that out. So
Yeah,
if you don't
so-
want to change that.
So the problem is if you raise the idle speed too much, and especially in a high performance boat, if you raise the idle speed so when it's in gear, it's at an idle that doesn't cause water reversion. When it's out of gear, it may be idling too fast, which in, let's say a Bravo or an XR situation, it might be too high of an idle speed, shifting without damaging the drive.
Right.
So it's you got to kind of find a balance there. Ultimately, what happens with headers, and especially with, like, let's say a sport tube, is each exhaust tube helps scavenging the adjacent tube, which keeps all of the exhausts going in the same direction. With just a manifold and a riser, that's not necessarily the situation, because at idle the exhaust is really not tuned, and I guess that's the right way to explain it.
Okay.
That was good.
That was good. Does anyone else want to lead off with that, or are we good?
I mean, I don't know if you wanna move on, we had a couple other questions
Okay.
come up with the 500s.
Okay?
Oh,
But,
that's-
so the person's question we answered is watching, so they like that.
Right.
And then, we had a, what about 500 EFI upgrades? 'Cause we're
Okay,
missing
so-
the
okay, so-
carburetor.
Okay, here's the difference between a 500 carb and a 500 EFI. A 500 carb has a carburetor on it.
Yeah.
A 500 EFI has a plenum and a throttle body, and it is controlled by a MEPI3 ECM, and it has a port injection, and it uses I'm going to call it one size bigger cam
Okay.
than a 500 carb. So believe it or not, the 500 EFI cam is the same cam that's used in a 700 SCI. So it's a grind that's been around for a long time, that was developed, that came from Crane, and but a 500 EFI, number one, came with CMI E-tops, came with a little bit bigger cam. It came with a different valve spring that was more reliable. They were actually built with a Comp 929 spring, and at that time they used a crane lifter and all that, and so basically speaking, RPM wise, in the stock configuration, they were designed to run the same RPM, but they had better exhaust, and even though they were both called 500s, the 500 EFI made a little more power, but they use exactly the same cylinder head, exactly the same piston. The first generation of the 500s actually used a GM connecting rod, and as time went along, they put an HB connecting rod that had a press pin in it, still using the JE 300 piston, which is basically the same piston in the 502. But it was definitely a step in the right direction, which eventually led to the 525 EFI.
That was good.
Did you guys all get that?
A few people commented during, like, well, you did carbureted, now let EFI.
Let's just
So that was
Right,
good.
yeah.
Let's just do the rest of it.
So 500 EFI, 525 EFI was probably, one of the most popular motors that Mercury ever built in a naturally aspirated motor. I raced them for years in Supercat Light, and it's a internally cooled motor. In other words, it has a heat exchanger and all that, so it's using coolant with internally. It uses what they call a sweeper header, which is more like a sport tube, long primary tubes and everything else. An aluminum head, which is definitely a step in the right direction for reliability, but pretty much the same piston and rod design as a 500 used. It's still a 502, which is a 4467 bore and a 4-inch stroke, and in factory configuration with a 5400 RPM rev limit. The way the heads were designed, the limiting factor was the fact that the only valve spring that would work is one that installs at 1.800, in other words, inch 800 inches. So that limited what you could do as far in the stock configuration as what to do with the heads. But generally speaking, the 525 ended up being a real standard staple and a very reliable platform that took all the things from all the previous engines and put it into this program that worked out very well. And it also went from a MEFI program into a P555 program. And there was 2 versions. One of them used an external crank trigger with a cam sensor that went where the distributor went. The later version, the crank trigger and the cam sensor was incorporated into the front timing cover, and it was a more refined version of the motor, and still one of the best overall programs that they had, which then evolved into the 565.
And you touched on racing, so maybe let's hold that thought, because I know Summer has more questions, because
Oh, no, we're good.
there's people
Yeah.
asking.
I'm just going through. I mean, if they're going on the topic, we'll
okay.
stay with it. And
Well, I know you mentioned
wanna
Racing
interrupt.
Factory earlier, and then we touched on Cat Light, which was 525s. There's a few questions going on because people are curious. Is Teague racing anymore? What's going on with what's your opinion on so many racing organizations? We don't have to get into all that. What's the future of Argo? What, a 36 versus a 388? Maybe touch on what you might be doing with OPA, whatever you want to cover racing wise.
Oh, well, the racing thing right now is secret.
Okay,
Not
sorry.
the
Okay,
word.
so
I mean,
so
what?
yeah, we still have a competitive Supercat boat sitting
Okay.
right on the other side of that door,
Right.
and the racing organizations are being basically revised right now, and we're very curious to see what happens. But you know, for us, racing is a way of validating our product, but also promoting our company, and we have a very competitive piece of equipment. Okay, so to answer one of your questions, a 368 is an 8-inch wider 36. Okay, so it's basically called a 36-8. So basically, the first 368 was built by taking a 36 and cutting it in half and making it 8 inches wider. That's how that boat became. And the first one that was ever built actually is the Bull on the Beach right now. That boat is the Bull on the Beach boat right now, is the first 368 that was ever built in a race boat configuration.
bad boat.
Okay, so in that boat was Popeyes, was in motion, so that's where it started life. So the 368 was without question probably the best overall competitive boat in the Cat Light. And as a Super Cat, still probably the fastest one, depending on water conditions. What a 388 is, which is Jimmy John's.
Down I-1.
Yeah, Jimmy
Skater.
John's, right. What a 368 is, and she's driven one.
Driven it.
I don't know if you know
Few
she's
times.
driven one.
I've driven
So.
once in a while.
Okay, so
Once in a
we're-
blue
okay,
moon.
so her dad's boat is a 388. Okay, so a 388 is a 368 2 feet longer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if it's actually 2 feet longer, but it's a little longer. There's a little bit of length. So that's the answer to your question. And I can
Okay.
tell you about 25 different models of skaters and MTIs and.
No, that was great.
Right.
Without getting too political, because I think
Yeah.
people are just curious. what's going on with the race program. We still have the race boat. It currently has Teague built engines in it.
So in summary, right now, OPA, which is based out of New Jersey, and P1 have come together and are proposing to have a race circuit next year in combination under the APBA banner.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the UIM sanctioning organization and under APBA, where I've been a member of APBA since 1973. And so it's going to go back under the APBA rules, as far as I understand, and they're going to have what you would call a national circuit, and they're going to have divisional races, and that's a term that goes way back, but that is basically what's on the table right now, and I think it looks pretty positive, and so you can look for some good things to come. The extreme class has all decided as a group to go back to the 1100s. So they're going to be racing in Mercury 1100s. And this gets subject to change, but that's the rumor.
All right.
And Super Cat is staying with the carbureted 510s that we have now, and also the stock boats, or whatever you want to talk them. That's the outboard twins. They're sticking with the Mercury 300s, and then the other class that's in a homologation situation right now is the V-Lights, which there's two configurations. One's a 525 and one of them's a 510 cubic inch carbureted motor. These guys are working to bring something together that makes these two configurations of that class, because at the OPA Worlds there was 15 of those boats with two different engine configurations. So they're working to come together as one class. So could be exciting.
I think you got Raul's question. That was good.
Okay. All right, well, I'm going to go with the question here that I have for you. What has been your feedback on the new MCO dual shaft lower? The handling, power reliability, what do you feel on it?
Okay, so
do you have anything yet?
this drive configuration has evolved from the need to have a lower profile, lower case in a Bravo style application. As you know, IMCO has what's known as an SC lower, which Teague Customer uses that case to build our platinum our lower drives with, and then they have an SCX drive, which has evolved into the current SCX drive, but has a much bigger lower case. In most performance applications, that using that SCX lower case results in a sacrifice in top end speed, in lieu of because you're gaining some, so you're supposedly gaining some reliability with the drive and higher horsepower things, but it does slow the boat down in most cases. Not all, but most. So there's a couple other versions that has evolved, and of course that's the SCX4, which uses a number 6 prop, which is 4 inches shorter than stock, and basically it's a surface drive prop that works really well on a twin engine application, especially catamaran, where the boat is not quite big enough for running, let's say, an M6 or something like that. Okay, so now we have this other group of boats that are running more horsepower than they should with an SC lower, and the whole idea is to spread the load over 2 sets of gears and 2 vertical shafts into a lower that doesn't have much more mass than a standard SC. Okay, these drives have been under some validation, or the lowers have been under some validation for maybe 4 or 5 months now, and it seems like it's going to be proving out. We do have a couple projects that we're working on that's going to incorporate that drive, and it is more expensive than an SC, but if it results in retaining the performance that you can get with an SC increasing the reliability. I think that's the entire goal.
So if you want bigger power, that's kind of the direction you want to go.
If your boat is the kind of boat that needs to have an SC case as opposed to an SCS lower, and that probably really fits almost all of the smaller single engine catamarans and most of the higher performance 28 and under deck boats.
Okay. Now, is there like, would you say there's like an RPM or like a certain range of where you would kind of put that group? Like,
Well, most of
when you
the
say high performance, where are we talking here?
we just tested a new Howard a couple days ago with one of our 1050s in it, and the engine's actually designed to run 6,400 RPM. Okay, so you know, when you, and it is not unusual now for us to be able to work with one of these companies and develop a deck boat
Right.
that runs 110
Oh,
miles
yeah.
an hour.
We have one, so.
and so that's the whole. It's a single engine deck boat that runs 110 miles an hour on 91 octane gas with 1-year warranty.
Family boating.
Family boating.
boating.
And it's not that you need to go 110 miles an hour, but when you have a boat that goes 110
Yes.
miles an hour, you can cruise at 75 all day.
Yeah.
So our 1050s are 6,400 RPM motor, and the 825s are 6,200 RPM motor. Doesn't mean run them there, but that's what they're capable of.
Perfect.
So, you know, when you're propping a boat, you want to prop it just slightly so that it's loaded a little bit lower than what the maximum engine speed is. And I don't care if it's our engines, Mercury Racing, anybody. You don't want to prop them so they are at the rim level. You want to prop them so they're 200 or 300 RPM below, and that's the best thing for the engine, and it puts the engine in a good positive torque situation.
Did you have a question
Yeah,
on
real,
that?
before we leave the IMCO drive comments, just real quick, what is the difference between the SCX and an SCX4?
Okay, an SCX is 2 inches shorter than a stock drive. Okay, and that measurement is from the crankshaft center line to the prop shaft center line without spacers or anything else. Is 2 inches shorter. Okay, but the gear case is fatter. Okay, so having a gear case that's fatter creates more parasitic loss, drag in the water. Okay, an SCX4 is designed to be a surface drive and is 4 inches shorter, and the whole idea is that the prop shaft is going to be higher, especially in a catamaran, than the running surface at the bottom.
Okay.
And we're talking 3 inches above-ish. And then instead of using a Bravo style propeller, which would be, you know, a Max 5, Maximus, Bravo 1, whatever. Now you're going to a number 6 cleaver prop. Okay, so you're talking about a 16.5-inch diameter propeller, a 5-blade, and it's a surface drive application, which is best suited for twin engine applications. And the reason I say that is because when you put a surface drive on a single engine boat, and only half of the propeller is contacting the water, there's that trim point where you might lose control of the boat, where the propeller rotation will cause the boat to skip out in the back.
And then you might want to point out, we've done part 1 and 2 of
Yes, we have.
drives and boat setup, so you can
Right.
go back and watch
Right.
those other
Yeah,
videos.
drive extensions, which I know some people are asking about that as well. We have all that on our YouTube channels. I know that on your homepage.
Yeah, on our
It's easy
Facebook.
to find. Facebook's, yes.
So you guys
We
can watch the
continually
other
get questions
videos.
about
Yes,
the effective and extension box.
yes.
Or turning props in or out.
Props in and out,
Yes.
whatever.
We have a Huge segment on all that.
Yeah, I got a big article coming out in Speedboat magazine on in or out,
Teague
which way is
Talk.
the best, why would you do it, what's the influence and everything
Can I
else.
stand behind you again,
Yeah,
showing
right, yeah.
Yes.
how it goes?
Okay, this is out,
I hope
this is in.
right?
Oh, when I'm, wait a minute,
Yeah,
this
wait,
is out.
This is out.
This is in.
This is it. Okay. That's
Yes.
recap from last
Yeah,
week.
right. I just wanted you to see her cool shoes.
Yeah, no, we got you the full thing, banner, peeps,
Oh, yeah. All.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a question here. Someone's asking what's involved in adding a oil thermostat to their engine, even if it doesn't run hot.
Okay, so first of all, a lot of people say, well, I don't ever see any temperature on my oil temperature gauge. And the first thing you gotta know is where are you measuring your oil temperature at? Okay, so if you have a really good oil cooler system like we use, or if you're running dual 13 plate coolers in a bell housing or something like that, the result is that the cooling system can take as much as 50 degrees or more out of the oil by passing through the cooler. So if you're measuring the oil temperature after at the filter head, let's say, after it goes through the cooling system, it's going to seem low because of the temperature has already been cooled. However, where the oil is hottest is going to be in the oil pan.
Okay.
What we really care about is not how hot the oil gets in the pan. What we care about is how hot the oil is going back to the motor. Okay, so
Right.
so if you have an adequate cooling system that gets it back to a reasonable temperature, so people go, so what causes the oil to get hot? Simply stated, what causes the oil to get hot, the most prominent thing is piston heat. The oil is what cools the bottom side of the pistons. And if your engine is running hot, if it's running lean, if the general coolant temperature of the engine is higher, the oil is going to be hotter. Okay, so what is the right oil temperature? The right oil temperature is as cool as you can run it without creating condensation in the engine. So a lot of people, there's this car attitude that says, oh yeah, if I have 200 degrees oil temperature, that means I'm going to make more horsepower. Actually, not. Definitely, at least in our situation where our craft, our engines are going uphill all the time, pulling a 50-foot long horse trailer
Yeah.
up a 6% grade. So our engines are under load all the time. It's not like a car where you have any coasting time. We're under a load all the time in high gear.
Yep.
Under load all the time in high gear. We don't have a gear we can shift down. We can't downshift. So the idea is especially with super high performance engines, is not to have excessive temperatures, whether it be coolant or oil. So if you're seeing any condensation in your oil, if you take the cap off the valve cover, if you see a little milk or something, your oil's probably not getting hot enough. Or you're having water reversion, you got a head gas leaking, you got an intercooler leaking or something like that. But if there's anything that's causing water or moisture to get in the engine, and there is no leaks, but it's developing anyway, because when the oil gets hot, it steams out the water, and you're going to see it basically in the valve cover area. So if you're seeing that, your oil's probably not hot enough. So that's when you want to consider having a thermostat system, and if you don't have one. And the conditions where that may occur are places like Canada, where the water never gets very warm, but temperatures aren't that high. Let's talk about maybe Lake Tahoe, where the water never gets over 55 degrees in the middle of summer, and things like that. So very cool conditions. Then an oil thermostat might be something you want to consider. But in the ultra high performance motors, your typical environment like Lake Havasu, down in Florida where it's never cool, where the water's warm and everything, I can only tell you this, from my experience, heat is death.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thermostats are not all that, but if, now here on the other hand though, there are several computerized controlled motors that require certain temperatures and parameters to operate at 100% throttle. Okay, so if your oil temperature or your coolant temperature is not up to what would be in that range of parameters, the computer has the ability to take power out of the motor until it gets into that parameters. And that would be the case, for example, with Mercury 1075s, Mercury 1350s, some of those engines that need certain temperature parameters to be able to run at 100% power.
Right. Yep.
And they are all thermostated motors, by the way.
Integrated. Everything's in.
Right, everything's integrated.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you have a
Bob,
question?
I got a question. Someone's asking, what if any upgrades can be done to the Merc 700 besides the Whipple stages?
Well, the Whipple thing is probably the easiest.
Okay.
And because there's several stages, but I would say if you're going to do it and you don't want to take the engine apart, the stage 3 is the most practical because you get the most bang for the buck without taking the engine apart. The 700 uses basically the same valve train as a 525. It uses the same cam as a 500, which is a little bit small for what it's doing. And one of the things that they do with the 700 is control the boost by boost bypass, and which is basically designed to protect the rest of the drivetrain. The weak link in the 700 is the transmission. It's a cone clutch transmission, and if you get that thing up in the 850 horsepower range, is not going to take that long, at least if you're not a careful driver, to possibly have a problem with the transmission. And so the transmission was designed to be able to put the engine in the same configuration as a standard Bravo installation, so that they'd be tight. The 700, however, using a 3.3 Lashome compressor with a boost bypass system, and if you take that engine and put a longer intake and exhaust valve in it, so you can put a better valve spring that has more valve spring tension, a lifter that will handle that. We have a custom made Johnson lifter that we use, that we put in those motors with a longer valve, tool room ISKI valve spring, and allows the engines to run up to 6,000 RPM without having any problem with the valve train. They're capable of doing it, and they're capable of making well in excess of 800 horsepower, but then you got to worry about the other components. Now, a lot of the 700s use the NXT drive, which doesn't seem to be that much of a problem, and a lot of them were outfitted with M6s or number 6 drives, depending on the manufacturer. But stage 3 is the easiest. Stage 4 requires you to take the engine apart.
And then I have both Jeremy and Scott are asking on that same idea, is it safe to Whipple a Merc Racing 525? And would that require any additional modifications?
The standard 525 Whipple kit, if you have an engine that is in good shape, and if you have an engine that's a second generation engine that uses Cometic head gaskets, and the reason that you would know that is if your engine has an internal crank sensor and an internal cam sensor, it is a later version. If it has a cam sensor where a distributor would be, it's an earlier version. The earlier version used a graphite head gasket, which really don't lend themselves well to supercharged application. The later version used a Cometic head gasket and a better head bolt configuration, which are actually a much better candidate. So if your engine's in really good shape, and if it doesn't have a whole bunch of hours on it, the stage 1 Whipple, which is a 3.3 with the standard intercooler, is a good option for that engine. We highly recommend that you, and we offer a Latham 2-stage pump for those motors, and we actually pump the intercooler as opposed to robbing water from the engine cooling water to cool the intercooler. So we highly recommend that you go the next step and go to a 2-stage water pump, but that is probably the best bang for a buck for upgrading those motors.
We've done a bunch of those.
We've done hundreds.
That's a
Hundreds
good
of
deal right
Right.
there. Amp it up.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, outside of that, we have developed programs to keep the engines naturally aspirated, cylinder head porting, all kinds of stuff, cam changes and everything, program changes, and it gets to be fairly expensive without the same benefit. And so, to me, the Whipple 3.3 program, don't go crazy, on the 525s is a really nice way to go. Now, if you have an earlier version engine, in order to do that, you need to change the head gaskets.
Okay. You know, they're talking amongst themselves on here. Someone has the old gaskets.
Right.
Yes. I think we should do like a supercharged versus,
Oh.
turbo. I think we should do something like
We're
that
getting
too.
those questions.
Yeah.
So if I'm not
Explain it.
answering you guys, I think that might be like its own video topic.
Yes.
People are asking different types of forced induction, why we choose certain setups, all of that.
Let's save that for another topic.
That's a lot.
'Cause there
We
could
could
be a
spend
lot
a
in there.
whole night
Yes.
We'll do that.
talking about
I was like, let's save that one.
roots blown,
Yes.
turbocharged,
Yes.
Whipple charged,
We can do that. That'll be
centrifugal
its-
supercharged, you
It's
know,
own-
I want to do that one. I
It's
think that would
own-
be a really good one.
and
Yeah.
and why we do what we do,
Yes.
and what we've done over the years, but
And we
it
used to
basically
someone
it
was
basically comes down to this. What people really care about is seat of the pants horsepower. What when you're driving your boat and it's not how fast it goes, it's how
How fast
good
you
it
get
goes
there.
fast. There's a difference, I
Well,
mean,
how
it's
fast you get
and it's that performance, the acceleration, the drivability, all that other stuff. All those are factors because we're in a business of promoting reliable pleasure boating, and that's the bottom line. So we have our opinions.
There's a lot of ways to answer that question.
There's a lot of ways to answer that question.
Yes.
Future topic, stay tuned.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So,
Is there other ones?
do you have more? I have more too.
Okay. No, somebody was asking, obviously, you mentioned to them, they have a Nordic key and they run a 5-blade, and they're asking if that applies also to their 496 as well. Is there enough
Sure.
information for that? Okay.
The difference between having a 496 and a Nordic key, which is a 28-foot V bottom, and having a 1,000 horsepower motor in that same boat is ultimately how fast it goes, and what the power is. So basically, there's a pitch for every propeller, for every power. So the pitch of the propeller. Now, someone asked me before this morning, what's P mean? It's pitch. Okay.
Everyone's abbreviating
Pitch-
everything.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
wait a
so,
minute.
so pitch, and I know you've all heard this before. Pitch is described in inches of pitch. Okay, and the pitch of a propeller is theoretical, and it's totally theoretical, of how many inches forward a propeller will travel if it's screwed through the water in one revolution.
Right.
So if it's a 30-bit propeller, all things being equal, and if everything was solid and there was no slip,
Yeah.
when the propeller rotated one time, it would go 30 inches forward in the water. So pitch is the first thing that you would adjust based off of your power available. So if your engine, in this case 496, 5,050 RPM, if it's stock, you need to select a pitch that will result in the engine running right around 4,900 to 5,000 open, 5,000 at wide open throttle in ideal conditions. Okay, and that is the prop that you would select based off of pitch. So you can get to that number based off of what you already know about your boat. If you're running a 4-blade Bravo, which is probably what the case is.
He says 5-blade here.
Right. So
Okay.
so now he wants to go to a 5-blade. We have found specifically on that boat. We've done about a half a dozen, maybe 10 of them now, where we've converted those boats to a Max 5, and that one of the best scenarios for that propeller. So let's say that a Max 5, which is the new propeller that Mercury came out with last year, a Max 5 on a boat that has 900 horsepower with a 1.5 gear, the right prop is a 30 pitch. If you've only got 425 horsepower, you're going to be looking at somewhere in the 24 to 25 pitch range for that deal. And it really has to do you have to have a comparison, a base. So if you have a 4-blade Bravo on there right now, and it's a 26 pitch, let's say, and the engine's running almost to 5,000 RPM, and you're probably gonna wanna come back a pitch for the 5-blade, and you're gonna pick up a lot more mid-range efficiency. And so there was another question that we had, and this keeps coming up about Maximus versus Max 5.
I feel like someone even asked this right now.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna grab a Maximus.
Was that Brian Taylor's mine? It almost sounded like the same question.
This is a Maximus,
Okay.
Yeah, it's similar.
okay? See how big the ears are and everything? This propeller, and this Maximus with a diffuser on it, and this propeller was originally developed by Mercury to run on an NXT drive. An NXT drive with the 700s, okay? That was the propeller. Now it has found a lot of good uses, especially on heavier boats, especially on boats that run a higher X dimension. It's found a lot of good homes. But off of the same casting, they developed this propeller, which somewhat replicates a Bravo 1 4-blade with 5 blades. Okay? Originally, this propeller, and this is not one of the original ones, this propeller was designed for the Mercury 400 outboards in a 15 diameter only.
Right.
Teague Marine has been doing a lot of testing with this in concert with Mercury, and we have developed a 15 1/4 diameter, which is now what we're stocking for the inboards, and it picked up another 2 to 3 in efficiency. And
Nice.
this is a 15 1/4 right here. And this exact prop is the one we ran on a Howard the other day. Deck boat at 110 miles an hour. And it's a 15 1/4 diameter, and this one's a 31 pitch. So 15 1/4, 31. The standard prop is a 15, and now we're incorporating a whole line of 15 1/4s to accommodate the inboard stern drive group. So there you are, Maximus. You can see the difference in the blades as opposed to Max 5. Now, the Maximus propellers and the original Bravo 1 lab propellers had the satin finish. Okay, and these are basically hand lab propellers. They're satin finished. The later Mercury propellers have gone what they call pro finish, and that is that shiny finish right there. It's still a lab prop, but the last thing that happens to that propeller, it goes through a media polish, and it helps refine it, and that is the standard right now. If you also notice that this propeller has no diffuser, basically it's been removed, and the diffuser is a flare on the end of the hub, and there's enough blades to help it get on plane without the diffuser. And ultimately, the propeller has no stern lift without the diffuser, and it's turned out to be a real winner.
And speaking of that, so the original design of the newer prop was outboards.
It was designed toward up. It was designed for originally the Mercury 400R.
Okay, and then Paul's asking, are you guys now doing anything that is outboard related? 2.5s, XS, Verados, do you do service upgrades there? What's going on?
Yes,
Lot of-
yes, and yes.
So,
Yeah, yeah. We are a Mercury race. We are a Mercury outboard dealer service center and Mercury Racing outboard dealer service center. And yes, we're actually building a boat right now with a pair of the new 300 race motors, which is the V8 naturally aspirated motor, and that boat is actually Josh's and Charlotte's. So
Yeah.
and so that's
outboard
our
mafia peeps.
outboard mafia group. So you guys can all.
Outboard
But yes, we are outboard certified.
Yeah,
at
well,
Teague.
yeah, we are.
We do that.
Yeah, you know, we have to go with the flow. We are definitely an inboard company, but we're smart enough to see what was coming down the pipe, and so we have definitely gone to the outboard role as well, and we're having a lot of fun with it actually. So we're happy to do it all. You know, one call gets it all at Teague Custom Marine actually.
That's true.
To actually circle back around to this, okay? Someone's asking, okay, this is gonna be a lot, so hold on. They're looking for a prop setup and they want their limiter Daytona 25 to hit 100 miles per hour. And with a modified 500 EFI, that's making 620 HP at 5300. He basically says, I currently have a stock 32 pitch Bravo 1, and I've hit 94 at 5200 with a Sportsmaster XR 1.5 ratio drive and 11% slip. You're getting all this? It's a lot right now.
I'm picking up on a few things. Okay, so first of all,
Well, hold on. He's asking if he's going to benefit with a 31 pitch max 5 with less slip. Or would it be better with a lap 32 pitch Bravo 1? To me.
number one,
He wants to hit his 100 mile per hour speed.
Number one, in order to go 100 miles an hour, in order to go fast,
Okay.
the first thing you have to have is what? Horsepower.
Yes.
Okay. So if you don't have the horsepower to pull a pitch to propel the boat to 100 miles an hour, it doesn't matter what propeller you put on it.
Yeah.
It's not going to go 100 miles an hour. Okay, so that being said, a 25 Daytona is a pretty darn good performance
Yeah.
boat, and but I don't know if it's going to exceed 100 miles an hour with 600 horsepower.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's also an arbitrary thing, but if probably the best all-around propeller over the years on a 25 Daytona has been a lab finish Bravo.
Okay.
Now, if he's got, let's say, he's got a 30 pitch lab finish Bravo on there now,
He's looking for a 32.
and the boat will only pull at 5,200 RPM,
Yeah.
and it's not hitting the rev limiter, the likelihood is if he puts the 32 on, it's going to run less RPM.
He said, let
And
us
it's
in.
not going to go
Yeah.
any faster, it's just going to be dog ear. So with a catamaran especially,
Okay.
RPM is speed. Because even though that you go out of, let's say, the torque or the horsepower increasing range, as the boat goes faster, it gets lighter because it's packing more air, and the faster you can turn that propeller, the faster the boat's going to go.
Right.
And so if he's got a 620 horsepower motor that only runs 5,300 RPM, something's up. That thing needs to run more RPM.
Okay.
And that's the way the boat's going to go faster. And I still think that on that particular boat, that a 4-blade Lab Bravo is the ticket.
Okay. Other than the max.
Over the,
Lab,
yeah,
okay.
because there's also the torque influence that a prop has on a boat, and the Bravo 4-blade on a lighter catamaran is more forgiving. The only thing you have to be careful with that boat is that they run a little bit nose light, and so when you're running into the wind, don't over trim it, so it could blow over.
Yes,
You
we all
know,
know that one.
so it's with any catamaran, but it's a great performance boat. They've got several models over the years, still based off of that same hull, and I still think that the Bravo won. Now, a Sportmaster lower, however, is probably not the fastest lower.
Okay.
A Sportmaster lower was originally designed to be a surface drive. And the first testing that Mercury ever did with a Sportmaster lower, as far as I know, was on a 30 Spectra. And it was run as a surface drive, and that's why it has 4 water pickups at the bottom of the gear case. Those 4 water pickups at the bottom of the gear case have a propensity to cause cavitation and distortion in front of the propeller. Not only that, they create drag. So one thing that can be done, especially if you have plenty of water pressure, we have actually taken those gear cases and welded up the two outside slots and confined the water into the 2 center slots and decrease the amount of drag that that boat has. In a racing configuration, back to back, with the Super Cat Light, back when it was running a 36 Gator with Bravos on it, the IMCO lower case was about 4 miles an hour faster than the Sportmaster. Everything else being equal.
That makes a difference.
Yeah, especially like 4
difference all
miles an
the
hour
time.
in an 80-mile race.
Yes, it
It's
does.
an hour. Think about it. You're going to be 5 miles behind.
Yes, you
Okay,
are.
that's not good.
No.
It's embarrassing. So
That's all the questions I have. As far as if there's any others on the live feed.
Yeah, I think we hit most of it. There's a
Yes.
few more people.
Right.
Don't worry, I see everybody, because some of these are involved, so
Yes.
I definitely wanna circle back around. I
We're
think
gonna
some
save
of
the
them.
questions.
We
Yes.
save them,
So
because,
this is
Some
good.
of them are very detailed,
yes,
so for
and
the
we'll
topics.
use for new
yeah.
topics. And so you guys know, if you missed this, or you wanna tell your friends about it and they're not on live right now, you can come back and watch it, because both Swoop and Teague put these up as a regular post
Yes, we do.
after the fact, and it saves all the lovely questions. And you can also go back to both of our video albums and our YouTube channels and watch the episodes you might have missed.
Yes. Exhaust props,
Yes.
drives.
Because we did a couple on both
Yes.
setup. We did one all on propellers.
Is anybody bored yet?
I'm just feeling tired. It's been a
Yeah.
long day.
Overwhelmed.
Yeah, there's a lot of information.
It's always
But-
a lot. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll definitely take your questions in consideration for possibly our next topic. And
This worked out good. I
Yes.
like the question and answer deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I like to respond to what people are doing. You know, when they're thinking about it.
We
You know.
did this. We just do it
Definitely.
all.
So far, I don't think I got stumped tonight.
no,
Yeah, right.
no, didn't get stumped.
Yeah.
We did good.
Swoop.
Oh, it doesn't like me rotating.
Yay!
But thank you everyone for following us. We do it for our customers and
Our friends.
our friends and
Our
our
friends.
boaters.
Yeah.
And
And
another one. 10th edition.
Merry
right there.
Christmas.
Yeah. Merry Christmas, you
Teague
guys.
Talk.
Happy holidays.
Bye guys.
Bye.
Thank
It is